The pattern. Nobody saw the unconnected. There's a moment in every investigation when someone realizes they've been looking at the wrong thing. Not the wrong evidence, not the wrong suspect, the wrong story entirely. In 1974, a mother in Visalia, California, woke to find her jewelry box open. In 1977, a husband in Sacramento lay face down on his bedroom floor. His wife's muffled crying came from the other room. On his back, balanced carefully, a stack of dishes. He was told not to move, not to make a sound, or she dies. In 1980, a couple in Ventura County didn't wake up at all. 3 stories, 3 cities, 3 types of crime. For 40 years, they existed in separate case files, separate task forces, separate detectives who would never meet. Because how could a teenage burglar, a methodical rapist, and a brutal murderer be the same person? How could someone evolve through categories of crime like chapters in a book? The answer is simple and disturbing. They weren't looking for evolution. They were looking for patterns. And the pattern was right there, in the silence between crimes, in the way doors were opened, in the hours chosen, in the control. This is not a story about coincidence. This is not a story about separate monsters. This is a story about one man who understood something law enforcement didn't. If you change the crime, you become invisible. These stories should never have been connected, but they were from the very beginning. And by the time anyone realized it, he had been inside over 200 homes. Chapter 1. The girl who checked her locks. Jennifer Carmichael was 17 when she started locking her bedroom door at night. Her mother thought it was teenage privacy. Her father thought it was rebellion. Neither of them knew about the journals. Visalia, California, 1974. A small town where people still left doors unlocked, where neighbors knew each other's schedules, where nothing bad happened until it did. Slowly, quietly, it started with small things. A window left open that should have been closed, a gate unlatched, muddy footprints on a porch that disappeared by morning. Jennifer noticed because she paid attention to details. She was the kind of girl who arranged her books by color, who knew exactly how she left things, and things were being moved. The first time was in September. She came home from school and her bedroom felt different. Not ransacked, not robbed, just disturbed. Her diary had been moved from the left side of her desk to the right. She was sure of it. Her mother said she must have forgotten. Her father said she was imagining things. But Jennifer started making notes. September 12th. Diary moved September 19th. Underwear drawer slightly open at September 24th. Closet door ajar. She didn't tell anyone about the list because who would believe her? Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Someone was just visiting. By November, the whole neighborhood was talking. Mrs. Chen woke up to find her jewelry scattered across her bed. The Kowalskis came home to their house completely rearranged. The Hendersons found their son's room had been entered while he slept. Police called it residential burglary. The newspapers called him the Visalia ransacker. But Jennifer knew something no one else seemed to understand. He wasn't ransacking. He was practicing. On December 10th, 1975, Jennifer wrote her last entry. He's getting bolder. He's staying longer. Last night, Mrs. Patterson said someone stood at the foot of her bed for 10 minutes before leaving, just watching her sleep. The police said it was probably a kid. But kids don't do this. Kids take things. Kids make noise. This is something else. I think he's choosing. I think he's deciding who comes next. 3 nights later, someone broke into the home of journalism professor Claude Snelling. His daughter heard noises outside. Claude went to investigate. He was shot twice, killed on his own lawn. The ransacker was gone, and so was Jennifer's journal, the one she kept hidden under her mattress, the one with all her notes. Her mother found it missing a week later when she was cleaning Jennifer's room. She mentioned it to police. They added it to the report. No one connected it to anything, because burglars don't read journals, and burglars don't shoot people. The crimes stopped. Visalia went quiet. Jennifer graduated high school, moved to San Francisco, and tried to forget. But she never stopped locking her bedroom door, and she never stopped checking the windows before she slept, because she understood something the police didn't. He hadn't stopped. He had just moved on. Chapter 2. The detective who couldn't forget, Richard Shelby, became a Sacramento County detective in 1976. His first major assignment was a sexual assault case. It would consume the next 3 years of his life, and it would never be solved. The call came in at 4:47 a.m. Rancho Cordova, suburban neighborhood, young couple, home invasion. When Shelby arrived, he expected the usual: broken window, forced entry, struggle. What he found was something else entirely. The back door had been unlocked with a pry bar, quietly, efficiently. Nothing was taken, nothing was broken, but everything had been controlled. Dozens of assaults. He knew what they looked like. This was different. The attacker had spent hours inside the house. He'd tied the husband with precise knots. He'd placed dishes on his back, plates, cups, saucers, stacked carefully, told him if he heard them fall, his wife would die. Then he'd gone into the bedroom, and the husband had lain there, frozen, listening, for 3 hours. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Different neighborhood, same method, back door, ligatures, dishes, control. A month after that, another, then another. By summer, there were 12 cases. By fall, 23. The press called him the East Area Rapist. Task force meetings filled conference rooms. Maps covered walls with colored pins. Psychological profiles piled up on desks. But they had nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA technology, no witnesses who saw his face. What they did have were patterns. Shelby spent his nights reviewing case files, making lists. The attacker always struck between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. He chose homes near open fields or bike trails, easy escape routes. He knew the layouts, knew which rooms the couple slept in, knew when they'd be home. He called victims before the attacks, said nothing, just breathed. He called them after, whispered that he'd come back. Sometimes he did. In August 1977, Shelby got a call from a detective in Visalia. "I heard about your cases," the detective said. "We had something similar a few years back. Different crimes, but the way he moved, the control, it reminded me." They compared notes. The Visalia ransacker had broken into over 100 homes, practiced, patient, methodical. He'd stopped in 1975. The East Area Rapist started in 1976. Shelby wrote a memo suggesting they might be connected. His lieutenant rejected it. "One's a burglar, one's a rapist. They're not the same guy." By 1979, there were 50 cases, 50 women whose lives had been shattered, 50 couples who would never feel safe in their homes again. And then in July, the East Area Rapist disappeared. No announcement, no final attack. He was just gone. Shelby stayed on the case for 2 more years, followed every lead, chased every tip. Nothing. He retired in 1995. On his last day, he boxed up his files and took them home. He never stopped believing the attacker was still out there. He just didn't know where to look, because 300 kilometers south in Orange County, something new had started, something worse, and no one connected it to Sacramento, because rapists don't become murderers. At least, that's what the textbook said. Turtle top. Chapter 3. The couple who never woke up. Charlene and Lyman Smith had been married for 3 years. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Ventura County. On March 13th, 1980, they went to bed like any other night. They never woke up. The Smiths were found by Charlene's mother on March 16th. She had a key. She let herself in. She called her daughter's name. The house was silent. What she found in the bedroom would haunt the investigators for decades. Both victims had been bludgeoned to death with a fireplace log. Both had been bound with the same type of ligature used in the East Area Rapist attacks. The home showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The killer had spent time there. Afterward, moving through rooms, eating food from their refrigerator, leaving the television on, control, even in murder. The detective assigned to the case was a 20-year veteran named Paul Holes. Well, not yet. In 1980, Paul Holes was still in high school. But this case, and the others like it, would define his career. Because the Smiths weren't the only ones. 3 months later, Patrice and Keith Harrington were found in their home in Dana Point. Bludgeoned, bound, no forced entry. August 1980. Manuela Withhoon, alone in her Irvine home while her husband was hospitalized, murdered in her bed. February 1981, Cherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez in Goleta. Same method, same control, same silence. The media called him the original Night Stalker. A different name, a different region, a different type of crime. Task forces formed, press conferences were held, rewards were offered. But no one suggested he might be the same person who terrorized Sacramento. Because the crimes were too different. The violence had escalated too far. The gap in time was too long. Paul Holes joined the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office in 1994. He was assigned cold cases. And he couldn't stop thinking about the original Night Stalker, the way the ligatures were tied, the way the killer moved through homes, the way he seemed to know everything about his victims. In 2001, DNA technology had advanced enough to test old evidence. Holes submitted samples from the original Night Stalker cases, and then, because something nagged at him, he submitted samples from the East Area Rapist cases. The results came back in 2002. Match. The East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. 50 rapes, 13 murders, 1 man. Holes stared at the report for an hour. Then he went back further. He requested case files from Visalia, the ransacker, the burglaries that happened right before the East Area Rapist appeared, the shooting of Professor Snellen. No DNA evidence had been collected in 1975, but the shoe prints matched, the method of entry matched, the hours matched, 1 man, 100 burglaries, 50 rapes, 13 murders, over 12 years, across the entire state of California, and no one had seen the pattern because they'd been looking at categories, not behavior. They'd been looking at what he did, not how he did it. Chapter 4. The name no one expected. By 2018, the case was 40 years old. Most of the original detectives were dead. The victims had gray hair, grandchildren, lives built on top of trauma. Joseph James DeAngelo was 72 years old. He lived in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento. He'd been married for decades. He had children, grandchildren. He was a retired mechanic, and he was a former police officer. Paul Holes had spent 18 years thinking about this case, 18 years comparing DNA, 18 years waiting for technology to catch up to his suspicion. In 2018, it finally did. Genealogical databases, public ancestry sites where people uploaded their DNA to find relatives. Holes uploaded the killer's DNA. It matched distant cousins. Holes built a family tree, narrowed the suspects, found one name that fit the age, the location, the timeline. Joseph James DeAngelo, born 1945, police officer in Exeter from 1973 to 1976. Exeter was 14 miles from Visalia. He was fired in 1979 for shoplifting dog repellent to keep dogs from barking when he entered homes. On April 24, 2018, police arrested DeAngelo in his driveway. He was watering his lawn. When they searched his home, they found dozens of pairs of women's jewelry, stolen driver's licenses, photographs of victims, and journals. Journals describing the crimes in methodical detail. Jennifer Carmichael, now 61 years old, was notified. She sat in her San Francisco apartment and cried, not because they'd caught him, because she'd been right. 43 years ago at 17, she'd known. He was practicing. He was choosing. He was going to get worse. And no one had listened. Richard Shelby, 84 and in declining health, watched the press conference from his living room. The boxes of case files still sat in his garage. He'd been right, too. The Visalia ransacker and the East Area rapist were the same person. But by the time anyone believed him, it was too late to stop the murders. Paul Holes stood in the back of the courtroom during DeAngelo's arraignment. He thought about all the cases, all the victims, all the detectives who'd worked themselves to exhaustion and died without answers. The pattern had been there all along, in the shoe prints, in the ligatures, in the hours, in the control, but they'd been looking at types of crime, not at the man committing them. DeAngelo had understood something fundamental. If you change what you do, no one connects who you are. Anatomy of invisibility. The question everyone asked was, how? How does someone commit over 200 crimes and disappear for 40 years? The answer isn't supernatural. It's methodical. DeAngelo didn't stop being a criminal. He stopped being one type of criminal. In Visalia, from 1974 to 1975, he broke into over 100 homes. He was a police officer in the neighboring town. He knew how investigations worked. He knew what evidence to avoid leaving. He started small, burglaries, entering homes while people slept, learning layouts, testing how long he could stay before someone woke up. It was practice. When Professor Snelling confronted him, DeAngelo shot him and fled. The Visalia police were too close, so he stopped, moved operations, changed tactics. In Sacramento, from 1976 to 1979, he escalated. Now, he wasn't just entering homes, he was controlling people inside them. The burglaries had taught him how to move silently, how to unlock doors, how to escape through backyards. Now he applied those skills to a different crime. The East Area Rapist cases followed the exact same pattern as the Visalia burglaries. Same hours, 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., same preparation, he stalked victims for weeks. Same escape routes, fields, trails, waterways. Same control, methodical, calm, prepared. But because the crime was different, rape instead of burglary, no one connected them. Different police departments, different case types, different databases. In 1979, D'Angelo was fired from the Auburn Police Department for shoplifting. The East Area Rapist disappeared. In Southern California, from 1979 to 1986, he evolved again. Now he was murdering, but the method was the same. Entry through unlocked doors or windows, victims bound with ligatures, crimes committed in the early morning hours, no forced entry, complete control. The original Night Stalker was the same person as the East Area Rapist. The East Area Rapist was the same person as the Visalia ransacker. But because law enforcement categorized crimes by type, burglary, sexual assault, homicide, they never saw the through line, the behavior, the signature, the evolution. D'Angelo understood that police think in boxes. Burglars are one type of criminal, rapists are another, murderers are another. No one looks for someone who moves between categories. So he became invisible, not by hiding, by transforming. The signs were always there. On June 29, 2020, Joseph James D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, dozens of victims spoke. Women now in their 70s, reading statements about the night a man came into their homes and destroyed their sense of safety forever. D'Angelo sat in a wheelchair, expressionless. Jennifer Carmichael didn't attend, but she wrote a letter to the court. In it, she described the journal she'd kept in 1974, the notes about things being moved, the feeling of being watched, the certainty that something was wrong. I knew, she wrote, and I told people, but I was 17 and no one believed me. Richard Shelby had died in 2016, 2 years before the arrest. His wife donated his case files to the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. Inside was a memo he'd written in 1977, suggesting the Visalia ransacker and East Area Rapist were connected. It had been rejected, filed away, forgotten. Paul Holes retired in 2018, shortly after D'Angelo's arrest. In interviews, he was asked how it felt to finally solve a case. He always gave the same answer. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief because the pattern was there. The evidence was there. We just didn't see it in time. The truth is that Joseph James D'Angelo didn't outsmart law enforcement. He simply understood that people see what they expect to see. And no one expected a burglar to become a rapist, or a rapist to become a murderer, or a police officer to become all three. Jennifer Carmichael still locks her bedroom door at night. Richard Shelby's case files sit in an archive, a monument to instinct ignored. Paul Holes gives lectures now, teaching investigators to look beyond categories, to see behavior, to trust patterns even when they don't make sense, because the signs were always there, in the silence between crimes, in the way doors were opened, in the hours chosen, in the control. D'Angelo committed his last known crime in 1986. He was never caught, never suspected, never even questioned. He lived 32 more years as a free man. He went to family barbecues. He attended his grandchildren's birthdays. He watered his lawn. And every single one of those years, someone somewhere was checking their locks, looking over their shoulder, wondering if the man who destroyed their life was still out there. He was. And the most disturbing part isn't that it took 40 years to find him. It's that if technology hadn't advanced, if genealogical databases hadn't existed, he would have died without anyone ever knowing his name. The pattern was always there. But we were looking at the crimes, not at the man who committed them. And that's the difference between solving a case and preventing the next one.